The CEO's son canceled my Frankfurt flight midair. I was the only person the German chairman would do business with. I read the email at 37,000 feet somewhere over the Atlantic. United Flight 441, Dulles to Frankfurt, hour 3 of 8. The in-flight Wi-Fi had just kicked in. That little green light on the seatback screen blinking like it had something important to tell me. I'd ordered black coffee from the flight attendant. Hadn't touched it yet, too hot. And I knew what was coming before I even opened my laptop. You develop a sense for incoming fire after 20 years in the Corps. The air pressure changes. The silence gets too quiet. The subject line loaded first. Organizational restructuring. Effective immediately. I'm Wayne Fletcher. I'm 51 years old. Spent 20 years in the Marine Corps before I traded my dress blues for business suits. Started as an 18-year-old grunt at Paris Island. Ended as a staff sergeant running intelligence operations out of Camp Pendleton. The last 15 years, I've been Vice President of Business Development at Apex Medical Systems, building relationships with European manufacturers who make the precision instruments that keep people alive. And right there at 37,000 feet, I was reading the email that said none of that mattered anymore. The email was 3 paragraphs of corporate speak: strategic realignment, operational efficiency, digital transformation initiatives, the kind of language that sounds important but means nothing.
Nowhere did it say the word fired, but that's exactly what it was. The timestamp showed 6:23 a.m. Eastern.
Zach Brenner had sent it from his corner office before most people had their first cup of coffee. He didn't copy his father, Scott. He didn't copy the board. He sure didn't call me first. Just fired off an email to a man on a plane he'd already decided shouldn't be going where he was going. I closed the laptop, picked up the coffee. It was bitter and burnt, exactly what United serves in business class, which is where Zach's new travel budget put senior management after he cut international expenses 2 months ago. I drank it slow, feeling the heat through the ceramic cup, the slight vibration of the engines through the armrest. 7 hours of Atlantic Ocean still ahead of me. Nothing to do but sit with it, and I'm good at sitting with things. 20 years in the Corps teaches you that. You learn to process information without immediately reacting. You learn that your first impulse is usually wrong, especially when you're running on adrenaline and ego. You learn to read the terrain before you make your move. What Zach Brenner didn't know could fill a warehouse. But one thing in particular was going to cost Apex Medical $280 million. Let me tell you about Zach. Zachary Scott Brenner, age 29. MBA from Wharton, summa cum laude, probably still has the diploma framed on his wall. Spent 18 months at a consulting firm in Boston, McKinsey. If you want to know, then walked straight into Apex as Chief Innovation Officer. That's a title his father created for him. It hadn't existed before Zach needed a job. That was 14 months ago. 14 months of watching this kid walk around with an iPad under his arm, talking about leveraging synergies and optimizing stakeholder value. He uses words like disrupt and scalable in every sentence. The way some people use salt. The kid's never closed a deal in his life. Never sat across from a 67-year-old German CEO who measures respect by the weight of your handshake, but he's got plenty of opinions about how everyone else should do their job. 2 months ago, he killed all international travel budgets. Every department, every relationship, effective immediately. Sent a company-wide memo about modernizing our engagement protocols and transitioning to digital-first relationship management. Corporate speak for we're going to save money by pretending Zoom calls build the same trust as sitting in someone's office. I filed a written objection through proper channels. 3 pages, single-spaced, explaining exactly why this was a mistake. It went to Helen Torres in legal, then to Zach's desk. He dismissed it without discussion, probably without reading it. Called it legacy thinking in the email he sent back. That travel freeze was going to destroy the Kruger relationship, and I knew it the day the memo hit my inbox. Hans Kruger was 67 years old, CEO of Kruger Medical Group in Frankfurt. 3rd-generation family business started by his grandfather in 1923. Survived 2 world wars and 3 recessions by understanding that business is about people, not spreadsheets. Hans didn't do business over video calls. He measured commitment by presence. You didn't send an email to Hans Kruger expecting an answer. You flew to Frankfurt. You sat across from him in his conference room with the oil paintings of his father and grandfather watching from the walls. You shook his hand. You looked him in the eye. You pronounced his name correctly. Kruger, not Krager. Meijer, because he could hear the difference and he would remember. I knew all this because I'd been doing it for 8 years. Hans and I had built something real together, not just contracts, trust, the kind that takes years to establish and seconds to destroy. Every quarter, I'd fly to Frankfurt. We'd spend the first hour talking about everything except business. His grandson's soccer team, my son's career with the state, the weather, the food, the way American tourists dressed when they visited the Romerberg. Then we'd get to work, numbers, timelines, specifications, but always with the understanding that we were two professionals who respected each other enough to do this right. That relationship was worth more than Zach's entire education. The morning I boarded that flight, I was supposed to meet with Klaus Weber, Kruger's procurement director, to finalize the $280 million contract renewal. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 6 days out. Hans was flying his entire executive team to the meeting. 4 senior VPs, their head of engineering, their chief financial officer. That's not something you do for paperwork. That's something you do for relationships, for partnerships that matter. But there I was at 37,000 feet, reading an email that said I was no longer employed by the company I'd helped build for 15 years. Organizational restructuring, effective immediately. The kind of corporate language that sounds official, but really means someone made a decision without thinking it through. I completed the flight anyway. What else was I going to do? Turn around over Greenland. I landed at Frankfurt International at 6:40 a.m. local time, took the S-Bahn into the city center, the same route I'd taken 32 times before. The train was full of commuters heading to work, reading newspapers, checking phones, living their normal lives while mine was falling apart in real time. I met Klaus at a cafe near the Kruger building. Small place, nothing fancy, the kind of spot where you can have a private conversation without worrying about who's listening. Klaus was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee growing cold in front of him. Klaus Weber was 58, been with Kruger for 23 years, worked his way up from the factory floor to the executive suite. He had thick hands and wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of steady presence that comes from decades of solving problems without making a fuss about it. We'd known each other for 6 years, ever since Hans put him in charge of the American relationship. "Wayne," he said, standing to shake my hand. "You look tired." "Long flight," I said, sitting down. "Klaus, I need to tell you something." I explained the situation with the only thing I had left to offer, the truth. I told him I'd been terminated. Told him I didn't know what Apex would do next. Told him I was sorry this was how it had to end. Klaus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his glasses and cleaned them with a napkin, the way people do when they're buying time to think. "This Zach Brenner," he said finally. "He is Scott's son?" "Yes, and he is how old?" 29. Klaus put his glasses back on. 29 years old, and he thinks he knows better than you how to do business with Germans. It wasn't a question, apparently. Klaus drained his coffee cup and set it down with more force than necessary. "I will inform the chairman." "But Wayne, you should know, midnight, this changes everything. Hans has been planning this trip for months. The board presentation, the facility tour, the signing dinner. He has already booked the restaurant." I nodded. "I understand. I do not think you do." Klaus leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Hans Kruger does not fly to America for contracts. He flies to America for people he trusts. Without you, there is no meeting, there is no contract." We sat in silence for a minute, watching Frankfurt wake up through the cafe window. Business people hurrying to appointments, tourists studying maps, ordinary life continuing while my professional world collapsed. "I'm sorry, Klaus." "You have nothing to be sorry for," he said, standing. "But this Zach Brenner will be—" I bought my own return ticket that afternoon, $2,100 on my personal credit card. Didn't even try to expense it. There was nobody left to expense it to. I sat in the airport for 3 hours, watching planes take off and land, thinking about all the flights I'd taken over the years, all the handshake deals and conference room conversations that had brought me to this moment. I thought about my son Brian, who was 28 now, working as a budget analyst for the state of Maryland. Good job, steady income, the kind of career that doesn't require you to miss family dinners for international trips. Brian had been 6 when I joined Apex, 14 when his mother and I divorced, 22 when he graduated college. I'd missed more of his life than I'd witnessed, always on a plane to somewhere that seemed important at the time, The divorce wasn't dramatic. No affairs, no big fights, just the slow erosion that happens when one person is never there. Sarah, that's my ex-wife. She tried for years to make it work. Would pack dinner and wait for me to come home from yet another business trip. Would smile and nod when I explained why this contract or that relationship required my personal attention. But eventually, she stopped waiting. Eventually, she stopped pretending that a marriage could survive on good intentions and weekend phone calls. Brian lived with his mother after the divorce, and I got alternating weekends and summer weeks. The kind of schedule that sounds reasonable in a lawyer's office and feels like torture in real life. Every other Friday, I'd drive to their house in Annapolis and try to be a father in 48-hour increments. Now Brian had a son of his own, Tommy, my grandson, 6 years old and full of questions about everything. Every time I saw Tommy, I saw the childhood I'd missed with Brian. The baseball games, the bedtime stories, the 1,000 small moments that build a relationship between a father and son. 2 months ago, Tommy had started t-ball. Brian sent me the game schedule without comment, just a text message with dates and times. I'd made it to 1 game so far. Sat on a metal bleacher, watched Tommy strike out twice and get 1 hit, applauded when he remembered to run to first base instead of third. After the game, Tommy had run over to the fence where I was standing. "Grandpa, did you see my hit? I saw it. Good job. Are you coming to the next game? I'll try, Tommy." He'd looked at me with those serious 6-year-old eyes. "You always say you'll try." That hurt more than anything Zach Brenner had put in his email. I landed at Dulla's on a Thursday evening. Took a cab home to my apartment in Arlington, a 1-bedroom place with a view of the parking lot and rent that ate up too much of my salary. Dropped my travel bag in the hallway and stood there for a minute, listening to the silence. My apartment smelled like old coffee and the kind of loneliness that settles into furniture when nobody's home for weeks at a time. I'd been living there for 6 years, ever since the divorce, and it still felt temporary, like I was camping out in my own life. I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. Pulled up the one document that mattered now, the original Apex Kruger partnership agreement, signed 8 years ago in a conference room in Frankfurt. Scott Brenner had handed me the signed copy personally at the dinner afterward, shaking my hand, telling me to keep it safe because it represented everything we'd built together. I turned to Section 12, Paragraph D, the relationship management clause that Zach had never bothered to read. All primary relationship management activities between Apex Medical Systems and Kruger Medical Group shall be conducted through the designated liaison officer, currently Wayne Fletcher, Vice President of Business Development. Any change to this designation requires 60 days written notice to Kruger Medical Group and written acknowledgement from the chairman's office, 60 days written notice. Written acknowledgement from Hans Kruger's office. Zach had provided neither. I pulled out my phone and called Andy Romano.
Andy and I had served together in the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force at Camp Pendleton, back when we were both young and stupid enough to think we were invincible.
He was a legal specialist. I was infantry. That was 28 years ago. Now he's a licensed attorney in Virginia, specializing in employment law and breach of contract cases. Andy's the kind of friend you don't talk to for 6 months, then call at 11 p.m. on a Thursday when your world's falling apart, and he picks up before the 2nd ring, like he's been waiting for your call. He picked up before the 2nd ring. "Wayne, Andy, I need you to look at something." I heard him set down a glass. Ice cubes clinking. Probably bourbon. Andy never lost his taste for the good stuff after we got back from overseas. "Talk to me." I read him the termination email, word for word. Then I read him Section 12, Paragraph D, the clause that protected relationships like the one I'd built with Kruger. The clause that required proper notice and acknowledgement. Andy was quiet for 12 seconds. I counted them. "Wayne, they didn't send notice to Kruger." "No." "Didn't get acknowledgement from the chairman's office." "No. This isn't just wrongful termination. This is a material breach of the partnership agreement itself. Kruger has the contractual right to void the pending renewal without penalty. You've got grounds for wrongful termination, tortious interference with the partnership agreement. I could file by Monday morning. I looked at the kitchen table, at the partnership agreement, at Scott's signature on the last page, next to mine and Hans's, all 3 names written in blue ink on a document that was supposed to protect what we'd built. "Don't file anything," I said. Silence. "Wayne, what are you doing?" I closed the agreement. Put it back in the manila folder. Put the folder in the desk drawer where I keep the things that matter. My discharge papers, my son's graduation photo, the watch my father left me. I'm letting the mechanism work. Andy knew me well enough not to push. We'd spent enough time in foxholes together to understand when someone has made up their mind about something. You know where to find me, he said. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for the next 6 days, watching the news and drinking coffee and waiting for the inevitable. I didn't call Apex, didn't call Scott, didn't post anything on social media about corporate injustice or ageism in the workplace. I just waited. Saturday, I drove to Annapolis to see Brian and Tommy. It's about an hour from my apartment, depending on traffic, past the Naval Academy and through neighborhoods full of colonial houses with American flags hanging from front porches. Brian lives in a 2-story house with a small yard and a mortgage he'll be paying off for the next 20 years. Good neighborhood, good schools, the kind of place where kids ride bikes in the street and neighbors know each other's names. Tommy was in the backyard when I arrived, throwing a tennis ball for Brian's dog, a golden retriever named Scout who was getting too old to chase anything but kept trying anyway. Tommy saw me coming around the side of the house and dropped the ball. Grandpa. He ran over and hugged my legs, the way 6-year-olds do when they're genuinely happy to see you. Tommy was wearing a Pirates jersey, Brian's old team, and had dirt on his knees from whatever adventure he'd been on that morning. Hey buddy, how's T-ball going? Good. I got a hit in practice yesterday. Want to see? We spent the next hour in the backyard, me tossing soft pitches while Tommy swung a plastic bat with all the concentration of a major league slugger. He connected about half the time, which was pretty good for a 6-year-old, and ran imaginary bases around the yard while Scout chased him in circles. Brian watched from the back porch, drinking a beer and looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. My son had inherited his mother's steady temperament and my stubborn streak, which made him good at his job and terrible at small talk. Dad, he said when Tommy went inside to get a drink, you seem different. Different how? I don't know. Calmer, maybe, like you're not thinking about work for once. I caught the tennis ball Tommy had abandoned and threw it for Scout, who retrieved it with the kind of determination that comes from years of practice. Work situation changed, I said. Good change or bad change? I looked at him. 28 years old, married now, a father himself. When had that happened? When had my son become a man while I was flying to business meetings in cities I can barely remember? Ask me in a week. Monday morning came and went. I did nothing. Tuesday, nothing. Wednesday morning at 7:30, Pete Valdez showed up at my apartment door with a manila envelope and 2 cups of gas station coffee. Pete had been at Apex for 12 years. Senior contracts manager, the kind of steady professional who keeps companies running while executives take credit for the results. He wore the same 3 ties in rotation and had never once used the word synergy in my presence. Printed these after everyone left last night, he said, handing me the envelope, figured you should see them. Inside were 5 internal emails, Zach to Scott, Zach to Helen Torres, our general counsel, Zach to the head of communications. I read them standing in my doorway, still wearing yesterday's shirt. The first email was dated 2 weeks before my termination. Zach to Scott, Fletcher represents legacy thinking. The Kruger relationship needs to be centralized under innovation, modern approach, digital first, no more flying someone to Germany every quarter for handshake deals. Not scalable. The second was Zach responding to Helen's memo about Section 12. Helen, reviewed your concerns. This is exactly the kind of legacy friction I was brought in to eliminate. We're moving forward with the new paradigm. The third email made my hands clench around the paper. Zach to Scott, sent the morning of my termination at 6:07 a.m., Fletcher won't push back. Divorced, paying alimony, 51 years old. Limited options in this sector at his age. Standard severance offer. Move forward. Problem solved. I read that 3 times, feeling the paper texture between my fingers, the weight of those words. Pete watched my face. The Kruger meeting is today. Tuesday? Zach's running it himself. No cultural briefing, no German translator on standby. Told the prep team he'd handle introductions personally because he wanted to, quote, establish the new paradigm from day one. Hans Kruger flew here with his entire board for this meeting, I said. I know. We stood there in my doorway, drinking terrible coffee and watching my neighborhood wake up. You're not going to do anything, Pete said. You're just going to let it happen. Some things you don't need to push, Pete. You just need to not be standing in front of them. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in Apex's main conference room. I know exactly what happened because Pete texted me real-time updates, because Helen Torres documented every minute in her official report, and because Hans Kruger's response letter described it in language so precise it read like a legal brief. Hans arrived at 9:45 a.m. with 4 executives, including Klaus Weber. Hans wore his customary dark navy suit and carried his business cards in the silver case his father had given him 40 years ago. Zach met them in the lobby, wearing a charcoal blazer and carrying his iPad. He extended one hand for a handshake. Hans paused. I could picture the moment, then shook it once, the way you might touch something you're not sure is clean. In the conference room, Zach took the head of the table and opened his laptop. Scott sat to his right, quiet. Scott always went quiet when Zach had decided how something would go. Zach began at exactly 10 a.m. Herr Kruger, welcome to Apex. We're excited about this next phase of digital partnership optimization. He mispronounced Hans's name, Krager instead of Kruger. Called him Herr instead of Chairman Kruger, the way Hans preferred in English. Hans's expression didn't change. Klaus stopped taking notes. For 8 minutes, Zach talked about digital transformation and scalable solutions and stakeholder value optimization. He used the word synergy twice and disruptive innovation 3 times. He didn't ask about Hans's flight, didn't ask about his family, didn't acknowledge the 8-year partnership or mention my name once. At the 9-minute mark, he opened a folder and slid the $280 million renewal contract across the mahogany table to Hans. Slid it across the table. In German business culture, you don't slide documents. You stand, you walk around the table. You present it with both hands, a slight bow, the document oriented so the recipient can read it. You wait for acknowledgement. Hans looked at the contract. Didn't touch it, said something in German to Klaus, one quiet sentence. Klaus nodded. Hans stood, buttoned his jacket. He spoke one sentence in English, the only English he used in the entire meeting. Where is Wayne Fletcher? Zach blinked twice. Mr. Fletcher is no longer with the company. We've streamlined relationship management under innovation for maximum efficiency. And thank you. Hans turned and walked out. Klaus and the other executives followed. The entire German delegation was gone in 45 seconds. 12 minutes. The meeting had been scheduled for 2 hours. Pete texted me at 10:13 a.m. They left. The next day, a courier from the German commercial consulate delivered a letter to Apex's front desk. Heavy stock paper, Kruger Medical Group letterhead, addressed to the board of directors. Helen Torres read it first. Her hands were shaking by the second paragraph. Kruger Medical Group was formally withdrawing from all negotiations with Apex Medical Systems. Material breach of Section 12, Paragraph D. Failure to provide required written notice. The meeting conduct was inconsistent with professional standards Chairman Kruger requires of his partners. Apex was placed on Kruger's exclusion list. No future communications, no meetings. Decision effective immediately, review in 5 years minimum. The letter mentioned my name 4 times. Helen called Scott at 5:30 p.m. He was home watching the History Channel. She read him every word, the breach citation, the exclusion list. The $280 million contract gone. The projected $600 million in renewals over 5 years gone with it. Where is Wayne? Scott asked after a long silence. Terminated 9 days ago. Phone deactivated, building access revoked. Call an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., every member. Friday morning, the board voted 6-0 to terminate Zach for cause. Scott abstained. Couldn't vote against his son, wouldn't defend him either. Monday, security escorted Zach out of the building. 2 days later, my phone rang. German country code. Mr. Fletcher, this is Dr. Mueller, Executive Counsel for Kruger Medical Group. Chairman Kruger has authorized me to extend a formal employment offer. Managing Director, North American Operations. I was sitting at my kitchen table, looking at the partnership agreement I'd kept safe for 8 years. The chairman also asked me to relay a message. Wayne Fletcher ist ein Mann, der sein Wort hält. He said you would understand. I did understand. Wayne Fletcher is a man who keeps his word. Tell the chairman I accept. 3 weeks later, I was sitting on a metal bleacher at Tommy's T-ball game. He got 2 hits and scored once. After the game, he ran over to the fence. Grandpa, you stayed the whole time. I did. You seem different? Like you're really here when you're here. I'm going to keep coming to your games, Tommy. Promise? Promise. Sometimes respect doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly, year after year, flight after flight, sitting in the right chair, pronouncing the name correctly, understanding that some things can't be optimized or disrupted. And when it walks out the door, you don't notice the silence right away. You notice the $280 million that went with it. If you've ever worked for someone who thought your experience was just legacy friction, if you've ever watched a younger boss destroy relationships it took decades to build, if you've ever been told your methods were outdated by someone who's never closed a deal in their life, you know exactly how this felt. The workplace has changed, but respect still matters, relationships still matter, and sometimes the best revenge is just stepping back and letting incompetence reveal itself. Hit that like button if you've been there, and subscribe for more stories about what happens when experience meets arrogance.